They say you never forget the moment your life takes a turn. Mine started with the smell of burnt coffee. I wasn't supposed to be inside that courtroom. I was only there to refill the urns cheap coffee for reporters and staff, same as every other Wednesday morning in the county courthouse. It was supposed to be quick, in and out, no eye contact, no trouble. But something about that morning felt wrong. The courtroom was unusually quiet, like everyone was waiting for something that never came. I pushed the cart through the door and froze. There he was, Samuel Whitaker, rancher, widower, owner of Whitaker Cattle Co., the biggest employer within 50 miles. I'd seen him before from a distance. At the fair, once in a tailored jacket dusted with Texas dirt. The kind of man who looked born into both fortune and silence. But now, he looked alone. Not the kind of alone that comes from sitting by yourself. The kind that sits heavy on your chest, like you've been left behind by the world. He stood at the defense table, staring at the empty chair beside him. The judge adjusted his glasses. Mr. Whitaker. "Where is your counsel?" Samuel cleared his throat. "He's not coming, Your Honor." A murmur rippled across the room. The reporters perked up like wolves sniffing blood. The opposing counsel, Miss Dane, I think her name was, leaned forward, already smelling victory. "I'd like to proceed, Your Honor," she said, all velvet and venom. "The defense has clearly waived its right to representation." The judge looked tired, annoyed. "Mr. Whitaker, are you aware of the implications?" "Yes," he replied, "but I have no choice. No choice." The words hung in the air. And me, I just stood there holding a carafe of stale coffee, watching a man be left to the wolves. Something twisted in my stomach. I hated how no one cared, that he was being devoured alive, not because he was guilty, but because he had no one left willing to stand beside him. The judge sighed. "If no one steps forward, we'll begin in 5 minutes." That was when I did something stupid. I put down the coffee pot, and I raised my hand. My hand was trembling, but somehow it stayed in the air. For a split second, I thought no one had noticed. The murmurs kept rising, cameras clicking like cicadas in the summer heat. Then the judge's eyes locked on me. "You there. Step forward." I froze. What was I doing? This wasn't my fight. I wasn't even supposed to be in this room. But my legs moved anyway. "Miss State." "Your name?" the judge ordered. "Lena Matthews, sir." My voice came out steadier than I felt. I work in the courthouse cafeteria." That earned a few snickers from the gallery. A reporter whispered something, and a few heads turned to look at me like I was some kind of circus act. The judge frowned. "Miss Matthews, why is your hand raised?" I swallowed hard. "Because..." My heart hammered in my chest. "Because I want to represent Mr. Whitaker." The entire room went silent. Then laughter, low at first, then louder. It rolled across the courtroom like a wave. The opposing counsel smirked. "Your Honor, is this some kind of joke? The cafeteria girl wants to play lawyer now." My face burned, but I didn't back down. "I studied law," I said louder this time. I didn't finish, but I know enough. Enough to help him. Enough to keep this from being a mockery of justice." "You studied law," the judge repeated, his voice cautious now. "Yes, sir. 2 years at the University of Austin. I dropped out because my dad got sick. Someone had to pay the bills. Samuel Whitaker's eyes were on me now. I'd never seen eyes so blue, so worn down. There was a flicker there, something between surprise and the faintest trace of hope. The judge tapped his gavel once. "Miss Matthews, are you aware of what you're asking?" This isn't a traffic ticket. This is a civil case involving millions of dollars and the future of a ranch that employs half this county. I'm aware, sir. I said though my knees felt like jelly. But isn't it better he have someone than no one? Your Honor, Miss Dane interrupted sharply. This is ridiculous. She's not qualified. She has no license, no experience. This will set a dangerous precedent. The judge raised a hand to silence her. Miss Matthews, do you know the details of this case? He asked. I do, sir. I took a deep breath. I've been following it since it started. I've read every public filing, every article, every transcript I could get my hands on. I know what's at stake. The judge stared at me for a long, heavy moment. Finally, he said, Very well. I'll allow it. Temporarily. Mr. Whitaker, do you accept her as your counsel until your attorney appears? Samuel's voice was hoarse when he answered, Yes, Your Honor. I accept. And just like that, I was standing at the defense table. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as I set down my notebook and faced the courtroom. I had no license, no title, no right to be here. But for the first time in years, I felt alive. I could feel her eyes on me the second I sat down. Elena Dane, partner at a high-rise firm in Dallas, known for breaking her opponents with nothing but her tone and her stare. Miss Matthews, she said, her voice as smooth and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. Or should I call you barista? The courtroom chuckled. I didn't look up from my notes. She leaned forward across the aisle, her perfume cloyingly sweet. Do you know how dangerous it is to play pretend in a place like this? I'm not pretending, I said quietly. Oh, she countered, her grin widening. Then where's your license? Your degree? Your years of experience? Surely you don't think watching court TV gives you the right to sit at counsel's table. The reporters in the front row scribbled frantically. I forced myself to meet her gaze. No, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. But someone needs to speak for him. You're not here for the truth. You're here to win. I'm here for the truth. She laughed softly like a teacher indulging a foolish child. That's adorable, she said. Really, you should put that on an apron next time you're serving coffee. The gallery erupted in soft giggles again. Samuel shifted uncomfortably beside me. You don't have to do this, Lena, he whispered. You're out of your depth. Maybe I should... No, I cut him off, keeping my voice low. They want you to feel like you've already lost. That's the game. I know this game, Sam. I looked back at Elena Dane and let out a slow breath. I don't have a law degree. That's true, I said aloud, my words ringing through the courtroom. But I know injustice when I see it. And I know how to fight for what's right, even if I have to do it without their approval. The judge cleared his throat. Counsel, let's proceed without the theatrics, he warned Elena. She straightened her jacket, shooting me one last amused glance. Of course, Your Honor, she said smoothly, though I'll remind the court this. Volunteer. She gestured at me, may not know the rules she's trying to play by. I kept my hands folded tight in my lap. My palms were sweaty, but there was a flicker of fire in my chest now. For years, I'd been invisible. A girl who took orders, cleaned tables, kept her head down, but not today. Today, they would remember my name. The gavel struck hard, echoing across the courtroom like a gunshot. Miss Matthews, Judge Harrington said, peering down at me over his spectacles, Do you understand the gravity of what you're asking? Yes, Your Honor. You're not an attorney. No, sir. You have no license, no formal standing before this court. Yet you're asking me to let you act as counsel for Mr. Whitaker. in a case that involves over $12 million in disputed assets. Yes, Your Honor. His eyebrows arched, his face a mask of disbelief. Why shouldn't I hold you in contempt for even suggesting it? The gallery murmured. I could feel the heat creeping up my neck, but I forced myself to stay steady. Because, Your Honor, I began gripping the edge of the table. The law isn't just about credentials. It's about fairness. Mr. Whitaker's lawyer abandoned him without warning. If this court proceeds without allowing him to have a voice that isn't justice, that's a death sentence for his livelihood. Miss Matthews, Judge Harrington said sharply, "The law is built on process. You cannot bypass it because you feel it's unfair." I nodded. "I understand, sir. But I also understand the facts of this case. I've reviewed every contract, every lease, and every piece of correspondence. I've lived and breathed this for months while I worked for Mr. Whitaker. I may not have a bar card, but I know what's at stake better than anyone else in this room." Elena Dane smirked. "Your Honor, this is absurd." She admits she isn't a lawyer. This trial can't turn into a community theater production. Miss Dane, the judge, barked. "You'll hold your tongue until I finish." She clamped her mouth shut, but her eyes shot daggers at me. Judge Harrington leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. "Miss Matthews, answer me. Are you aware of Texas Civil Procedure Rule, ISA 12-01, regarding unauthorized practice of law?" "Yes, sir," I said without hesitation. "It prohibits non-lawyers from representing clients, but subsection B provides an exception when the court determines there is extraordinary necessity and no licensed attorney is available." The judge's eyes narrowed, slightly surprised. "Go on." "Given Mr. Whitaker's counsel walked out moments ago, and no replacement can be secured before the proceedings resume, this qualifies as extraordinary necessity. I'm requesting permission to represent him temporarily until he retains proper counsel." There was silence. Even the reporters stopped scribbling. Judge Harrington tapped a finger against his bench, staring hard at me. "You're walking on a knife's edge, Miss Matthews," he said finally. "But the law allows me discretion in these circumstances." He turned to Samuel. "Mr. Whitaker, do you consent to this woman acting in your defense temporarily?" Samuel hesitated. His hand trembled as he gripped the table. "Yes, Your Honor," he said hoarsely. "She's the only one who knows what's really going on." The judge let out a long sigh. "Very well," he declared, his voice filling the room. "Miss Matthews, you have provisional permission to act as Mr. Whitaker's representative until such time as proper counsel is appointed. One misstep, and this privilege is revoked." "Understood." "Yes, Your Honor. Then let's proceed." As his gavel came down, a ripple of whispers swept through the room. Elena Dane's smile was gone now, and for the first time that day, I felt the faintest flicker of hope. The courtroom air felt heavier as I stood clutching my worn leather notebook like a shield. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steadier than I felt with your permission, "I'd like to begin my opening arguments." Judge Harrington gave me a curt nod. "Proceed, Miss Matthews." I glanced at Samuel. His face was pale, lips pressed tight, but when our eyes met, he gave a slight nod. That tiny flicker of trust was all I needed. I stepped forward, facing the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard the plaintiff's counsel paint my client as reckless, negligent, and undeserving of his land. But what you haven't heard are the facts. Facts buried beneath layers of half-truths and omissions." Elena Dane, seated across the aisle, smirked. "Here we go. she murmured just loud enough for me to hear. Ignoring her, I opened my notebook pages filled with late-night scribbles and meticulously cross-referenced dates. For 3 months, I continued. I've worked on Mr. Whitaker's ranch. While serving coffee and sweeping floors, I was listening, observing, and recording. And in that time, I discovered patterns, contracts, backdated payments, rerouted, and leases altered without my client's knowledge. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. I turned toward the evidence table, lifting a copy of the disputed lease. Here is Exhibit B. The plaintiff claims Mr. Whitaker violated this lease's payment schedule, but if you compare it to the original draft filed with the county clerk, I held up another document. You'll see the dates don't match. The version they presented was altered after signatures were obtained. Objection, Elena shot to her feet. This is speculation. She's not qualified to analyze legal documents. Your Honor, I countered quickly. I'm not offering analysis. I'm pointing to verifiable discrepancies between public records and the documents entered into evidence. Judge Harrington adjusted his glasses. Overruled. Continue, Miss Matthews. I nodded, adrenaline surging. For every accusation hurled at my client, there's a piece of evidence they'd prefer you didn't see. Like this email chain, I tapped a printed exchange I'd intercepted while cleaning Samuel's office. It suggests the plaintiff's partners plan to force a default by withholding key supply deliveries. The jury leaned forward now, their attention shifting. Elena's confident expression faltered for the first time. This isn't just a case about missed payments, I said softly but firmly. This is about a calculated attempt to seize land that's been in my client's family for 3 generations, and I intend to prove it. As I stepped back to the defense table, my heart pounded like a drum. I could feel every eye in the room on me. Samuel whispered, "How did you even find all that I gave him?" A small smile. "You'd be surprised what a coffee girl can learn when no one's paying attention." Across the aisle, Elena's jaw tightened. For the first time, the balance of power in the room had shifted, and I intended to keep it that way. The next morning, the air in the courtroom was thick with tension. I hadn't slept a wink. All night, I'd combed through Samuel's old files, ledgers, receipts, emails, and then just before dawn, I found it. One overlooked contract. One hidden clause. One smoking gun. Now, standing before the court, I could feel every heartbeat in the room echo in my chest. Your Honor. I began clutching the folder tightly. I'd like to present newly discovered evidence that directly challenges the plaintiff's claim of rightful ownership. Elena shot up from her chair. Objection. This is highly irregular. She's pulling tricks to stall proceedings. Judge Harrington narrowed his eyes at her. Ms. Dane, sit down. If the defense has relevant evidence, I want to see it. I handed the folder to the bailiff who brought it to the judge. This document, I explained, is a land transfer agreement signed 2 years ago. The plaintiff asserts that Mr. Whitaker voluntarily transferred 80 acres of his ranch to them in exchange for debt forgiveness. But here's the problem. I pointed to the highlighted section. Clause 14 states, "This transfer is null and void if the creditor fails to provide agreed capital improvements within 6 months. That condition was never met. No improvements were made. The plaintiff defaulted, rendering this transfer unenforceable. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Elena's voice wavered as she stood again. This is irrelevant. That clause is ambiguous at best. Ambiguous, I shot back, stepping forward. There's nothing ambiguous about their failure to act. And I have bank statements showing they withdrew the funds earmarked for those improvements into a private account. Not only did they fail to meet the contract terms, they diverted resources for personal gain. Gasps rippled through the gallery. The judge flipped through the pages with sharp focus. "Ms. Dane, can you refute this?" Elena hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. "Your Honor," she said, her tone suddenly measured. "I will need time to review this material." "Granted," the judge said firmly. "But let me be clear. If these allegations hold, your client may face fraud charges." I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight lift off my shoulders. At the defense table, Samuel turned to me, his face etched with disbelief. You found it." "Yes," I whispered back, my voice shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. It was there all along, hidden in plain sight. For months he'd seemed like a man standing on the edge of ruin. Now for the first time, I saw a flicker of hope in his tired eyes. Across the aisle, Elena's composure cracked ever so slightly as she shuffled her papers. This wasn't over, not yet. But I'd just flipped the script, and everyone in that room knew it. As the gavel struck, and the judge adjourned for lunch, I felt my legs weaken beneath me. The courtroom emptied quickly, but Samuel lingered in his chair, like a man suddenly unmoored. I gathered my notes, still unsure if I should speak. After all, until this morning, Samuel Whitaker hadn't looked at me for more than a passing second. To him, I had been the woman who brewed his coffee and swept the dust from his boots. Now his piercing blue eyes were locked on me. "I don't know what to say," he murmured, his voice lower than I'd ever heard it. "You don't need to say anything," I replied, slipping the folder of evidence into my bag. "This isn't over yet. They'll come back swinging and harder." He nodded, rubbing his rough hands together. "When my lawyer left this morning, I thought it was done. I thought I'd be stripped of everything my family built over 3 generations. Then you." His voice trailed off. I kept my gaze on the floor. I wasn't trying to be a hero. Someone had to stand up. "You're not a lawyer anymore," he said gently. "Why risk this for me, for a man who barely knew your name?" The question burned in my chest. "Because I know what it feels like to have no one fight for you," I answered quietly. "And because you deserve at least a chance to defend what's yours." A long silence followed. Then Samuel did something I didn't expect. He straightened his jacket and extended his hand. "Thank you, Lena. Whatever happens, I'll never forget this." I hesitated, then took his hand. His grip was strong but warm, not the iron fist I'd imagined. As we stepped outside, the sunlight felt harsh. A cluster of locals stood across the courthouse steps, neighbors, ranchers, and townsfolk I'd grown up around. Their eyes bore into me like daggers. "There she is," one woman muttered loud enough for me to hear. "The maid playing lawyer. What a circus. Probably thinks she's going to get a piece of his land, too." A man snorted. My cheeks burned. I kept walking, shoulders stiff, but every word landed like a stone in my stomach. Beside me, Samuel glanced at them, his jaw tightening. He stopped in his tracks. "That's enough," he said sharply, his deep voice cutting through the whispers. "This woman is risking more than any of you ever would for me. Show some damn respect." The murmurs fell silent. I froze. No one had ever defended me like that before. Not in this town. As we reached his old pickup truck, Samuel opened the door for me. For the first time, I saw humility in his eyes, where there used to be only pride. "You've got more guts than half the men I know, Lena," he said. Don't let their small minds get to you. I climbed in, gripping my bag tightly, but inside something shifted. This wasn't just about a ranch anymore. It was about proving to everyone and to myself that I was more than the girl in the apron pouring coffee. The courtroom erupted in a quiet gasp as the judge's gavel slammed down one final time. Based on the evidence provided, this court finds in favor of Mr. Samuel Whitaker. The fraudulent contract is hereby voided, and ownership of the Whitaker Ranch shall remain with its rightful heir. I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I was holding. The weight of the last few days left my body in a rush, leaving me dizzy. Behind me, Samuel stood tall, his broad shoulders no longer hunched by fear or defeat. For a moment he didn't move. Then he reached for my hand. "Lena," he said softly so only I could hear. "You saved my family's legacy." The corners of my lips lifted into the faintest smile. "You saved it. I just reminded the court of the truth." But when I looked up into his eyes, I realized something had changed. Not just in him. In me, too. We walked out of the courthouse together. Reporters and locals swarmed us, cameras, flashing microphones shoved toward our faces. "Miss Carter, how does it feel to win your first case? Are you and Mr. Whitaker partners now in business or in life?" Samuel raised his hand, shielding me from the blinding lights. No comment, he said firmly, guiding me through the chaos. Once inside the quiet of his truck, he turned to me. "I have to ask, what's next for you?" I stared at my hands. They were still trembling slightly. "I don't know. I hadn't thought past this moment." "You should." He hesitated, then continued. "Lena, I don't want this to be the last time we work together. I could use someone like you on the ranch with my business. Maybe even to help others in town. We could build something here. Together." The word "together" lingered in the air between us. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. It was an email from the dean of the law school I'd left years ago. "Miss Carter, we've been following your recent case with great interest. If you're ready to resume your studies, we'd be honored to welcome you back this fall. A full scholarship is available should you accept." My chest tightened. The choice sat before me, like two diverging roads. On one path, the chance to finally finish what I started to reclaim, the dream I'd buried, when my father fell ill, and I dropped out. On the other, this quiet town, a stubborn rancher, who'd shown me more respect in weeks than most had in a lifetime, and the possibility of building a new kind of life. Samuel watched me silently, as though he could read every thought in my mind. "You don't have to decide now," he said gently. "But whatever you choose, know this: you're capable of more than you think, and whether it's here or out there, you'll make a damn fine lawyer." I smiled, though my heart ached with the weight of it all. "Thank you, Samuel." As the truck rumbled to life, I looked out at the wide open plains, stretching endlessly under the setting sun. For the first time in years, the future felt both terrifying and wide open. And I wasn't sure yet which way I'd go, but I knew one thing: I wasn't invisible anymore. I thought the hardest part was over when the judge finally allowed me to represent Samuel in court. I was wrong. The morning after our first big victory, I woke up to the sound of my phone, buzzing relentlessly on the nightstand. Dozens of notifications flashed across the screen. At first, I thought it was just my mom checking in on me from Wisconsin, or maybe my best friend texting about last night's hearing. But as I scrolled, my stomach sank. Young coffee girl becomes lawyer overnight, for billionaire rancher romance rumors swirl. Who is Lena Hayes? the mysterious assistant defending Samuel Whitaker in court. From serving coffee to serving justice, or just serving the boss. The headlines were everywhere, and they weren't kind. I pulled on a hoodie and tried to ignore it as I drove to the ranch. But when I pulled up to the gate, a cluster of reporters was already there, cameras flashing as if they'd been waiting for me all night. "Miss Hayes, are you and Mr. Whitaker involved romantically? Did Samuel hire you because of your legal skills or your looks? Are you qualified to even be in that courtroom?" Each question felt like a dagger. I kept my head down and pushed through, gripping the steering wheel tighter as my knuckles turned white. The ranch hands stared as I passed by, some with curiosity, others with thinly veiled contempt. When I stepped into the main house, Samuel was pacing the living room. He was dressed down today, jeans and a button-down rolled at the sleeves, but the tension in his jaw could have cut glass. "I'm sorry," I blurted out before he could say anything. "I didn't mean for this to get so out of hand." He stopped pacing and looked at me. For a moment, his eyes softened. "This isn't your fault," he said quietly. "You saved me yesterday, Lena, and now they're looking for a scandal because it's easier than believing you're just that good." But then his expression hardened again. "Still, we have to handle this carefully. The press can make or break people, and right now, they're out for blood." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I wanted to say I didn't care what they wrote about me, that their words couldn't touch me, but that would have been a lie. I did care. Deep down, I'd worked too hard and sacrificed too much to let a few salacious headlines reduce me to nothing more than the coffee girl. As I sat at the kitchen table later that afternoon, scrolling through another wave of articles, I could hear the ranch staff whispering in the hallway. "Think she's sleeping with him? Why else would he let her play lawyer pretty girl like that? She knows what she's doing." I wanted to run out there and scream, to tell them about the years I spent buried in law books, the nights I stayed up crying over my mom's medical bills, the countless hours memorizing every detail of Samuel's case, not for him, but for justice. But I didn't. I stayed quiet, because I knew the only way to silence them wasn't with words. It was with a win. By the third day, the whispers weren't just in the hallway anymore. It started with small things. A ranch hand named Rick stopped holding the door for me like he always used to. Rosie the cook didn't greet me in the kitchen that morning. Instead, she shot me a look that felt sharper than the butcher knife she held in her hand. At first, I tried to brush it off. Maybe they were just stressed. Maybe the media circus outside the gates was making everyone tense. But then, I overheard them. "She's just using her looks to get ahead," Rosie muttered as I passed by the pantry. "Yeah," Rick said with a low laugh. "A billionaire boss, a young, pretty assistant. Come on, we all know how that story ends." "You think she's really here for justice?" Rosie scoffed. "She's here for his wallet. Or maybe his bed." My cheeks burned my chest tight. I wanted to burst in there and scream, "You don't know me. You don't know what I've sacrificed to be here." But instead, I kept walking. That afternoon I went out to the stables to clear my head. The scent of hay and leather usually calmed me, but today it didn't help. I could still hear their words echoing in my skull. Coffee girl turned lawyer overnight, sleeping her way to the top. I'd worked so hard to prove myself in court, but out here, to them, I was still just the help. "Don't let them get to you," a deep voice said behind me. I turned to see Samuel standing there, his hands tucked into his jeans pockets. He looked tired, but his eyes held that same quiet fire I'd seen in the courtroom. "They don't know what you've done for me," he said. "What you're doing." "But I do." I shook my head, biting back the sting in my eyes. "It's not just about me anymore, Samuel. Every headline, every whisper, they're using me to get to you. They think I'm here because of you. And are you?" he asked softly. I looked up, startled. "Are you here for me? Or for justice?" I opened my mouth, then closed it again. Because the truth was complicated. I was here for justice, but somewhere along the way, this hard-guarded man had gotten under my skin. "I'm here because it's the right thing to do," I said finally. He gave me a long look, then nodded, then let them talk. In the end, the only thing that will shut them up is winning. And as he walked away, I realized he was right. If I wanted their respect, I couldn't ask for it. I'd have to earn it. That night I found Samuel alone on the porch, a glass of bourbon in his hand. The sky stretched endlessly above us, a canvas of stars too beautiful for the turmoil we both felt inside. For the first time since I met him, he looked small. Not in size. Samuel Whitaker was still every bit the towering man who could command a room with his presence, but in spirit. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked softly, stepping closer. He didn't look up. Sleep's a luxury I haven't had in years. The bitterness in his voice surprised me. "I always thought if I worked hard enough, built this ranch big enough, no one could take it from me," he said, swirling the bourbon. Turns out, I was wrong. I hesitated, then sat on the edge of the step beside him. "What happened, Samuel? How did it get this far?" He let out a long breath, and for a moment I thought he wouldn't answer. "I trusted the wrong people," he said finally. "My own brother Matthew. When our parents died, I was too young to handle the business side of things. Matthew handled the books. I handled the cattle. It worked until it didn't." His jaw clenched. He mortgaged the land without telling me, invested in schemes that bled us dry. By the time I found out the contracts were signed, and the wolves were already at the door, I felt my chest tighten. "What about the lawsuit?" I asked. "The one we're fighting now. How does that fit in?" Samuel gave a humorless laugh, the final nail in the coffin. "One of Matthew's old partners claims I'm withholding property that was promised in a deal. It's a lie. But the papers say otherwise." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I could hear the crickets, the distant lowing of cattle, the sound of his slow, measured breathing. "When you stood up in that courtroom," he said finally, "I thought you were insane." I smiled faintly. "So did I. But you're not," he continued, his voice softer now. "You're the only person who's seen me, not just the rancher, not just the man on trial, but me." I looked at him, really looked at him, the weight on his shoulders, the lines etched into his face, the pain in his eyes. And for the first time I realized how lonely he must have been all these years. "Maybe it's time you stopped carrying it all alone," I said gently. He turned his head, and for a split second I saw something raw in his expression. Hope. The next morning, Samuel was waiting for me in the dusty barn, a stack of old ledgers and contracts piled high on the workbench. His sleeves were rolled up, and for once there wasn't a hint of his usual guardedness. "You're early," I said, surprised. "Couldn't sleep again," he replied, handing me a box of folders. "I figured we'd better get ahead before the next court date." We worked in silence at first. Dust motes floated in the sunlight streaming through the wooden slats of the barn. The smell of hay and leather filled the air, grounding me in a world so far removed from the sterile courtrooms and polished law offices I once dreamed of. But as I flipped through the documents, my concentration was broken by Samuel's low voice. "You really know your way around legal language for someone who makes coffee and sweeps floors." I looked up sharply, unsure if it was a jab or a compliment. "I studied law," I said simply. 2 years at the University of Texas. I had to drop out when my dad got sick. Someone had to pay the bills. Samuel's gaze softened. "You should have gone back." "I couldn't," I murmured, eyes dropping back to the papers. He didn't press. Instead, he pushed another folder toward me. "Here. These are contracts Matthew signed with the developers. Something in there feels wrong. I don't have the words for it, but I think you might." For the next hour, we combed through the documents together. I traced my finger over signatures, dates, and fine print. And Samuel leaned over my shoulder, his cologne and the warmth of his body unsettling me in ways I didn't expect. "You know," he said quietly at one point, "I never thought I'd be sitting in my barn with someone like you fighting for this ranch." "Someone like me?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "I mean, you're sharp, determined. You don't belong here mucking stalls and making coffee." I smiled faintly. "Funny, I always thought people like you and me live in different worlds." "Maybe," he admitted, leaning back on the bench. "But right now, those worlds don't feel so far apart." For the first time, there was no trace of the wealthy landowner or the hired help. Just 2 people sitting in a barn, chasing the faint hope of justice. And in that moment, I realized something dangerous. I didn't just want to save the ranch anymore. I wanted to save him. It was nearly midnight when I finished stacking the last of the folders. The ranch house was silent, except for the occasional creak of wood contracting in the cool night air. Samuel was standing by the window, staring out into the fields, where the moonlight spread like silver paint over the pastures. "You should get some sleep," I said softly. "Tomorrow's another long day." He didn't turn. "Do you ever feel like you're fighting battles you were never meant to win?" His voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it, almost fragile. "All the time," I admitted, setting the papers down. He turned then, and in the dim glow of the lamp he looked different. Not like the sharp, intimidating ranch owner I first met, but like a man stripped of armor. "I need to tell you something, Lena." I froze. There was something in his tone that made my heart stutter. When my lawyer left me hanging in that courtroom, I thought it was over. I thought they'd take everything, my land, my family's legacy, and I'd just let them. He took a slow step closer. "And then you stood up. You, this stubborn, brave woman in a wrinkled shirt, said you'd defend me. You didn't have to, but you did." "Samuel," I began, but he raised a hand. "I can't stop thinking about you. Not just because you saved me in court. Not because you're smart or strong, though you are. It's more than that." His eyes searched mine, and the air between us seemed to hum. "I think I've been falling for you from the moment you walked into my kitchen with that chipped coffee mug." My breath caught. My mind screamed at me to step back to remember. Where we stood him, a man born into wealth and land, and me, the girl hired to scrub his floors. "Don't say that," I whispered. "Why not? Because this isn't real. We're from 2 different worlds. When the trial is over, you'll go back to yours, and I'll still be—" I gestured helplessly. "You think I care about any of that?" His voice broke. "I care about you." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. but the weight of years of being invisible, of knowing my place in other people's houses, pressed heavy on my chest. "I can't," I said, finally forcing the words past the ache in my throat. "I can't afford to lose myself in a dream." The silence that followed was deafening. "Then tell me." "This," Samuel murmured, his voice low, "if we're just employer and employee. Why are you trembling right now?" I didn't have an answer. Because he was right. The next morning I walked into the courthouse to find a cluster of reporters waiting at the steps. "Miss Callahan, is it true? You've been staying at the Whitaker Ranch, Lena. Are you and Samuel Whitaker involved romantically? Did you really drop out of law school because of inappropriate conduct?" Their voices hit me like stones. I kept my head down and pushed through heart hammering. Inside, Samuel was pacing. He looked up, concern etched deep into his features. "They're everywhere," I said breathlessly. "I know." He handed me his phone. On the screen was an article from a local blog. The headline screamed, "Coffee Girl Turned Courtroom Savior," or "Gold Digger in Disguise." Bile rose in my throat as I read the words. She dropped out of law school under mysterious circumstances. Sources claim she's using her close relationship with Whitaker to manipulate the case in his favor. "They're twisting everything," I whispered. "It's Preston," Samuel growled. "That snake hired someone to dig into your past." My hands clenched. "He's trying to make me look like a fraud." "If the judge sees this, you're not a fraud," Samuel said firmly. I wanted to believe him, but my mind spun with memories I'd buried deep the night I walked away from law school, the whispered rumors that followed me for months. What if he finds out about I stopped myself? About what Samuel asked? I shook my head. Nothing. It doesn't matter. But it did. Preston's threat wasn't just about the case. He was circling closer to a secret I'd fought for years to forget. And if it came out, it wouldn't just destroy my credibility in court. It would destroy me. "We'll fight this," Samuel said. "Whatever it takes." I wanted to thank him, to draw strength from his conviction, but as I looked into his eyes, I realized I wasn't afraid for myself anymore. I was afraid for him. If Preston uncovered the truth, Samuel would be dragged down with me. And I couldn't let that happen. The courtroom was packed. Every bench filled every corner, buzzing with tension. Reporters sat poised with pens and cameras, eager to document the downfall of either Samuel Whitaker or me. I could feel their eyes burning into my back as I rose to deliver my argument. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady, despite the storm inside me. "The plaintiff's case rests on a web of deceit and forged contracts. Today, I will untangle that web." Preston Marshall, the plaintiff's attorney, smirked across the aisle. "Objection. The defense is resorting to theatrics." "Overruled," the judge said sharply. I locked eyes with Preston. He thinks he's already won. "Let's talk about Exhibit C." I continued, holding up a stack of papers, the lease agreement that supposedly transferred ownership of the Whitaker Ranch. If you look closely at the signature date March 5th, you'll see it predates the bank transfer by 2 weeks. That alone raises questions. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. But there's more. The notary seal is identical to one used on a different contract, one that was proven fraudulent in a case 5 years ago. I clicked a remote. On the screen appeared 2 documents side by side, the same seal, the same signature. Coincidence, I asked, letting the word hang in the air, or evidence of a pattern Preston shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this is irrelevant." The judge glared at him. "Sit down, Mr. Marshall. I'm listening." I pressed on, my confidence building. "Furthermore, We have traced the funds from the Whitaker Ranch sale. They were funneled through shell companies and ended up in an account linked to Mr. Marshall's client. Gasps erupted. The plaintiff, a slick developer named Howard Kessler, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His face flushed red. "Your Honor," I said firmly, "this isn't just a property dispute. It's a calculated scheme to defraud my client of his family's legacy." For a moment the room was silent. Even the reporters stopped scribbling. Then the judge spoke. "Do you have evidence to support these claims?" I nodded. "We do. Bank records, testimonies, and expert analysis, all submitted as part of our supplemental brief." The judge flipped through the folder. Preston was pale now, sweat beading on his brow. "This court takes fraud allegations seriously," the judge said. "Mr. Marshall, unless you can refute these claims, I will be forced to dismiss your client's suit and refer the matter for criminal investigation." Preston opened his mouth, then closed it again. Kessler stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. That girl isn't even a real lawyer." The judge slammed his gavel. "Enough. Miss Callahan may not hold a license, but she has demonstrated a grasp of the law and uncovered evidence this court cannot ignore." Samuel placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did it," he whispered. But I couldn't relax, not yet. Preston still had one card to play. "Your Honor," he said slowly, a cruel smile returning to his lips. "Before you rule the defense's credibility must be questioned. Miss Callahan has her own history of deception." He held up a file. My stomach dropped. "Shall we discuss why she left law school?" The judge's eyes narrowed. "What are you implying? Not here." "Not now," I thought frantically, but Preston smirked. The court deserves to know who's really standing before them. My ears rang as Preston's words echoed through the courtroom. "Shall we discuss why Miss Callahan really left law school, or how she spent her nights working in a bar serving drinks and charming customers for tips?" A collective gasp swept through the room. Cameras flashed like lightning. Reporters' pens scratched furiously on their notepads. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands gripped the edge of the table so tightly my knuckles turned white. This is it, I thought. The moment they all turn on me. "Your Honor," Preston continued with a venomous smile, "the defense has painted Miss Callahan as a selfless heroine, but the truth is less noble. She walked away from her education and ended up waiting tables in a backwater bar. Hardly the image of credibility this court should trust." Samuel shot to his feet. "Enough," his deep voice thundered across the room. "What she did to survive is none of your damn business." "Sit down, Mr. Whitaker," the judge warned sharply. Preston leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "If she couldn't handle law school, how can she handle the complexities of this case?" I swallowed hard, my throat dry as sandpaper. The courtroom blurred for a moment. My mind spiraled back to that cold winter night 2 years ago. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and despair. My mother's frail hand gripped mine as she whispered, "Lena, promise me you'll keep going. Don't let my sickness ruin your future." But I couldn't. Tuition was overdue. The landlord wanted rent, and the only job I could get fast was serving whiskey shots to leering men in a roadside bar. That wasn't the life I wanted, but it was the only way to keep her alive. Now those sacrifices, the ones that saved my mother, were being twisted into weapons against me. I took a deep breath. My heart pounded like a war drum. "Your Honor," I said, standing tall despite the tremor in my voice, "what Mr. Marshall says is true. I left law school when my mother was diagnosed with late-stage cancer. I took whatever work I could find to pay for her treatment. Gasps, whispered judgments. I ignored them. Yes, I worked in a bar, and yes, I served drinks to strangers, but I will not apologize for doing what I had to do to save my family. The judge regarded me over his glasses. Are you admitting this voluntarily? Yes, sir. Because I have nothing to hide. I straightened my shoulders. And if this court wants to punish me for loving my mother enough to sacrifice my dreams, so be it. But don't punish my client. He deserves justice. For a moment, silence gripped the room like a vice. Then Samuel spoke, his voice low but unshakable. Your Honor, she may not have a law degree, but Lena Callahan has more integrity than anyone in this courtroom, including me. The judge's gavel came down sharply. Enough. The witness and counsel will refrain from personal attacks. Miss Callahan's past, while unconventional, is not grounds to dismiss her arguments. Outside the courthouse, a swarm of reporters waited. Miss Callahan, did you really work in a bar? Are you and Mr. Whitaker romantically involved? Do you think you're qualified to win this case? I paused at the top of the courthouse steps. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward. I could run, or I could face them. I chose the latter. Yes, I said firmly. I worked in a bar, and I'm not ashamed. I've fought for everything I have, and I'll keep fighting for what's right. The crowd hushed. For once, no one seemed sure what to say, and in that quiet, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't the scared girl scraping by anymore. I was Lena Callahan, the woman who stood her ground. The courtroom was suffocating. I could feel every gaze in the room pressing down on me. Preston sat smugly across the aisle, his polished shoes tapping in quiet triumph. He thought he'd won. We had one last chance, and it was a slim one. The judge adjusted his glasses and said, Ms. Callahan, if you have no further evidence, we'll proceed to closing arguments. Your Honor, I said, trying to keep the desperation from my voice. We do have one final witness. A rebuttal. Preston's head jerked up. What? The doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open, and there she was, an older woman in a floral dress clutching a worn leather handbag like it carried her whole world. Her name was Grace Holloway Samuel's former accountant, and the person Preston thought he had silenced months ago. You're supposed to be in Florida, Preston hissed under his breath. Grace met his glare with surprising steel in her eyes. Changed my mind. Samuel leaned toward me, voice low. You tracked her down? No, I whispered back. She called me last night. Said she couldn't live with the lie anymore. The judge gestured. Ms. Holloway, take the stand. As Grace was sworn in, I sent a silent prayer skyward. Please let this work, Ms. Holloway. I began gently. You were Mr. Whitaker's accountant for 15 years, correct? Yes, ma'am, and you handled the financial records for the property sale in question. I did. What can you tell the court about those records? Grace took a deep breath. They were doctored. I was instructed by Preston Marshall himself to adjust figures and backdate contracts to make it appear Mr. Whitaker was in breach of agreement. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Preston shot to his feet. Objection, hearsay, and baseless accusations. Overruled, the judge said firmly. Continue, Ms. Callahan. Why are you telling us this now? Ms. Holloway, I asked. Grace's voice cracked. Because I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking of my own grandchildren and how ashamed they'd be if they knew I let an innocent man lose everything. I nodded. Thank you for your honesty. By the time I turned back to the jury, the mood in the room had shifted. The disdain in their eyes was gone. In its place, anger. But not at me. At Preston. Your Honor. I said, my voice strong now. The evidence is clear. Mr. Whitaker was the victim of fraud, and this court has the power to make it right. The judge's gavel came down. Jury will deliberate. We waited in agonizing silence for what felt like hours. When the jury finally filed back in, I grabbed Samuel's hand under the table. To my surprise, he didn't pull away. The foreman stood. We find in favor of the defendant. Mr. Whitaker retains full ownership of his property and is awarded damages for fraudulent misrepresentation. The room erupted. Reporters surged forward. Samuel exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. You did it, Lena, he said, his voice thick. We did it. For the first time in weeks, I let myself smile. But deep down, I knew this victory wasn't the end. For me, it was just the beginning. The sound of the gavel still echoed in my ears, even as we stepped out of the courthouse. It felt unreal. Samuel Whitaker stood beside me, his posture straighter than I had ever seen it. Gone was the man slumped in defeat, the one I had first watched from a corner of the courtroom weeks ago. In his place was someone proud, alive, and profoundly grateful. Outside, the courthouse steps were flooded with cameras and microphones. Reporters barked questions, their voices overlapping into an unintelligible roar. Miss Callahan, how does it feel to win against such impossible odds? Do you plan on finishing law school now? Are the rumors of your relationship with Mr. Whitaker true? I froze for a moment under the onslaught. Samuel's hand gently brushed my elbow, steadying me. He leaned in close and whispered, You don't owe them anything, Lena. But maybe I did. Not to the reporters, but to the countless people watching from their living rooms, people who had once been invisible like me. I took a deep breath and stepped forward. This case was never about me, I said, my voice carrying over the crowd. It was about standing up when you see something wrong. I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just couldn't stay silent. Click, click, click. The shutters fired like a symphony. The real story here is about justice. For farmers like Samuel Whitaker, who are too often crushed by powerful corporations. For people who are told they don't matter because of their job title or their bank account balance. I hope this reminds everyone watching that justice isn't reserved for the rich or the connected. It belongs to all of us. The applause was unexpected, spontaneous from somewhere in the crowd. Then it grew louder and louder until it seemed the whole courthouse plaza was clapping. I felt my throat tighten. When I turned, Samuel was smiling at me, not the polite, practiced smile of a wealthy landowner, but something warmer. You're remarkable, Lena, he murmured. I lowered my eyes. I'm just trying to do what's right. Exactly. The days that followed were a blur. The story went viral overnight. Headlines blared, Coffee girl turned legal hero, saves billionaire, rancher faced with injustice. She rose to the occasion. Lena Callahan, the Cinderella of the courtroom law firms from across the country, called. Offers poured in, some more flattering than others. Ms. Callahan, we'd like to sponsor your return to law school and guarantee you a position after graduation. You have raw talent and incredible composure under pressure. With the right mentorship, you could be one of the best litigators of your generation. It was surreal. 8 months ago, I had been scrubbing floors in a stranger's mansion, ashamed of the dreams I had buried. Now, I was being courted by the very world I had once been forced to leave behind. But not everyone was celebrating. At the ranch, I caught sideways glances from the staff. Some of the hands still avoided me altogether, their silence loud with judgment. "She thinks she's too good for us now," I overheard one woman mutter in the kitchen. It stung, but I didn't let it show. Late one evening, I found Samuel in the stables brushing down one of the horses. The golden light of the setting sun spilled across his broad shoulders. "You should take one of those offers, Lena," he said without looking up. I leaned against the stall door. "You sound like you're trying to get rid of me." His mouth curved into a sad smile. "I'm trying to set you free. You don't belong here anymore. You belong out there. Changing the world." Something in my chest twisted. "And what about you?" I asked softly. He finally turned to face me. His eyes were tired, but there was something unbreakable in them now. "I'll be fine. This place, it's my legacy. But you, Lena..." He paused. "You're meant for more than this ranch." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the horse's steady breathing. "I ain't told a Saf." That night, as I lay awake in the small guest room at the ranch, I stared at the ceiling and thought about everything that had led me here. The sacrifices, the humiliation, the whispered doubts in my own mind, and Samuel, the man who had once been nothing but a name on a mailbox to me. He had trusted me when no one else would, believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. I wasn't sure if I was ready to leave, or if I even wanted to. But deep down, I knew he was right. If I stayed, I'd always wonder what might have been. And Samuel deserved someone who stayed, because they wanted him, not because they were afraid of the world beyond his fences. By morning, I had made my decision. The letter sat unopened on my nightstand for 3 days. Every time I reached for it, my hand froze. It wasn't that I didn't know what was inside. I knew perfectly well. The University of Chicago Law School, a full scholarship. A chance to finish what I'd started years ago before my mother's illness had forced me to trade textbooks for night shifts at the diner. And yet, every time I thought about leaving, my chest tightened in a way I couldn't explain. It wasn't just the ranch. It wasn't just the quiet mornings with coffee on the porch, or the scent of hay and honeysuckle that clung to the air. It was Samuel. He found me that evening by the lake. The sun was sinking low, turning the water to molten gold. Samuel approached quietly, boots crunching over the gravel. "You've been avoiding me," he said softly. I didn't deny it. "You got the letter." Again I said nothing. Samuel let out a long breath and sat beside me on the dock. For a while, we just sat there watching dragonflies skim across the surface of the water. Finally he spoke. "Lena, I'm not good at this." I turned to look at him. His strong, weathered hands were clasped tightly in his lap, as if holding on to something fragile. I've spent most of my life keeping people at arm's length, trusting no one, loving no one. He met my eyes, and there was no mask there now. But you came into my life like a storm. You challenged me. You stood by me when I had nothing left. "Samuel," I began, but he held up a hand. "Let me finish." He took a deep breath. "I love you, Lena. Not because you saved my ranch, though God knows I'll never forget that. I love you because you see me, the real me. And for the first time in my life, I want to build something that isn't just land or cattle. I want to build a life with you." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and beautiful. I know you have dreams. He continued, his voice lower now. And I'd never want to hold you back. But if there's even a part of you that wants to stay, we could make this work together. Since my throat ached as I struggled to speak. Samuel, I care about you more than I can say. These past months, they've changed me. You've changed me. He smiled faintly, but there was pain in his eyes. But I swallowed hard. But law has always been my dream. Before all this, before I ever stepped foot on your ranch, it was the only thing I wanted. It still is. Then go, he said softly. His words broke something in me. You make it sound so simple, I whispered. But it's not. If I leave, I'm afraid I'll lose you. Samuel reached out and took my hand. If this is real, Lena, if what we have is real, then it won't be lost. And I won't let you give up your dreams for me. I love you too much for that. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Could I really have both, or was love always about sacrifice? The next morning, I stood at the edge of the pasture watching the horses graze. In my pocket was my acceptance letter. In my chest was a war between heart and ambition. Behind me, Samuel called my name. When I turned, his expression was calm, steady. No matter what you decide, he said, I'll be rooting for you. Always. I stood by the old oak tree at the edge of the ranch, my suitcase at my feet. The air was cool that morning, heavy with the scent of cut grass and the faint sweetness of honeysuckle. Dawn lights spilled across the fields, painting the world gold one last time for me. Samuel was there leaning against the fence. His boots were dusty, his shirt sleeves rolled up like it was any other day, but the look in his eyes said otherwise. I guess this is it, he said softly. I knotted my throat tight. Chicago isn't forever, I whispered, trying to convince myself as much as him. 5 years is a long time, Lena. He took a step closer, his hand brushing mine. For a moment I thought he might pull me into his arms, beg me to stay. A part of me wished he would. But Samuel wasn't that man. He'd never ask me to clip my wings for him. You're going to make one hell of a lawyer, he said, his voice steady, but his jaw tight. The world needs people like you, more than this old ranch does. Tears blurred my vision. And what about you? I asked. He smiled faintly. I'll be here, taking care of this land, these animals, and hoping that someday, when you're ready, you'll come back. The sound of the pickup truck pulling into the driveway broke the moment. My ride to the airport. I turned to face Samuel fully. These past months, I don't have words for what they've meant to me. You don't need words, Lena. Then he cupped my face in his hands, and for a fleeting moment the world fell away. The kiss was tender, unhurried, filled with everything we couldn't say. It was a promise and a goodbye all at once. When he pulled back, his eyes were glassy. If it's meant to be, we'll find our way back to each other, he said softly. I picked up my suitcase, my hands trembling. Take care of yourself, Samuel. You too, counselor. He gave me a crooked smile, the one that had undone me 1,000 times. As I walked toward the truck, I didn't dare look back. I knew if I did, I might not have the strength to leave. From the window, as the truck pulled away, I saw him still standing there by the fence hands in his pockets, watching me go. I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling the ache that had settled deep inside. I was walking toward my dream, but it felt like leaving a piece of my heart behind. Years later, people would ask me why I became a lawyer. I'd tell them about justice, about helping people who had no voice. But in the quiet moments when no one was listening, I'd remember a man with calloused hands and storm-gray eyes who taught me that love sometimes means letting go. And I'd whisper to myself, if it's meant to be, we'll meet again.